Welcome back to another reading and correcting with me, Kindar, the Tiger Writes, and Ty, the Tiger Supervisor. These are where I read a chapter from one of my stories and correct it as I go. If you want to listen to these live, it's every Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Time on Twitch. And if you are looking to support me, that is on my Patreon. Today we are doing chapter 100 of Breaking Step. Tibs did his best to ignore the them following as he followed the guard. He didn't know why he'd been summoned. He'd just finished tabulating the rings in his ledger and working out how they would be distributed when he sensed the woman with too much essence to be a runner step up to his table. That meant she came at the guild's request and not Irdian. She'd asked that he come with her, and he had no way to refuse. The them had followed him out of the inn, its tendril of secrets spreading about the crowd. It was like it was instilling secrets into everything around it. A few blocks from the guild, Don, accompanied by his own guard, joined them. He gave a shrug at Tibbs's raised eyebrow, the most either was willing to do with others around. Tibbs's main concern was if it would get in the way of his and Don's planned training. The them didn't follow into the guild, and Tibbs realized that sense of secret from before, which he now understood was the them, had never come inside before. Yeah. Had never come inside either. And okay. The sense of secret. I realized that the sense of secret that had been in the town, which he now understood was a them, had never come inside before either. Did they not feel anything important happened here, or were the protection of the building keeping it out? How could he find out which it was? And if it was the latter, would Stowe be able to make use of them? Or rather, how would Tibbs find out what those weaves were so Stowe could use them? Instead of the back of the building, the guard took them to one of the large rooms past the training ones. Clerks sometimes gathered there to discuss things that affected many of them. Tibbs had stayed by an open door once while they talked until he understood they were discussing how they should change the recording of how much paper they used in the course of a day. He had enough to do with his own ledger. He had no interest in listening in on how others did theirs. So he hadn't bothered with them after that. Like the one time he looked in, the room had a long table in its center with pages and pages stacked on them. In the far corner, a desk had yet more stacks of them. A man dressed in what could almost be a guard's armor, but just by the design, instead of the material used, looked at a page from the table, then searched for a pile to add it to that. He noticed them in the process, paused, then dismissed them to get back to his work. His expression had the severity Don and Alistair got when they were looking for a way to make Tibbs understand they did not approve of what he did. Although he didn't get the sense from this man that they accepted the types of excuse Tibbs might give. There was something unforgiving in those eyes. There they are, Tirania said, her dour expression turning proud on seeing them. Who are they? The man asked, not looking up from the page he was reading. The expression had an undercurrent. The exasperation had an undercurrent of anger. They're heroes of Craggle Rock, she said, beaming. The man looked at them in surprise this time. He straightened, his expression becoming a lesser version of the severe one he'd worn while working. So, these are who you had leading the fight against the Welsh criminal? He asked, unimpressed. The anger at her taking the credit was so unexpected, Tibbs needed many breaths before it would settle, and he trusted himself to look in her direction. Of course she had. Why was he surprised? It was what she did. Turned the things she let happen into her triumph when they ended up being resolved. And how many runners did letting them handle the situation cost you? The man asked casually. Tibbs was surprised again, but this time it was because he never before had anyone from the guild ask that. Tibbs didn't have the numbers, but he could give one that would be high. Well, not still high enough. He was certain of it. Only those who were too weak to survive. She replied in the same casualness. Although from her, with what Tibbs knew of the woman, it came across as dismissiveness. They would have perished throughout the runs if the dungeon wasn't progressing at the time. And it would have been fed. The words were sharp and he glared at her. Tibbs's hope someone cared about them were doused faster than fire encased in ice. Of course, the man didn't care about the runners as people, just as food for the dungeon. He was from the guild, after all. The man motioned to the papers on the table. Do you have any idea how behind you letting so many of them die outside the dungeon put us? What I've had to do so your utter lack of judgment wouldn't cause my schedules to be completely disrupted? I have explained my this. He grabbed a page, toppling the stack next to it in the motion. You call this an explanation? He looked at it, searched. There. Due to the unexpected nature of the criminal's arrival and his inability to hide his intention, I hide his intention? Unexpected arrival? Tyr, the man was in your district for months before he did anything. He bought a house. How did you not look into that after your chief guard at the time, his brother, told you the man needed to be kept under supervision? He was nearly yelling now, and Tereniel looked taken about. I never saw it. The words had the glow. The word and the glow on them were cut. Really? Because Erdian found a stack of copies from the reports Harry wrote, all addressed to you directly. Are you telling me that on top, on top of being negligent about a known criminal establishing himself within your district, you are so lax? Your subordinates think they can decide for you which reports you get to see? No, of course not, she stammered and closed her mouth at the slamming of the paper on the table, causing more stacks to fall over, some spilling off the side. What you should have done, he said through gritted teeth, was have Harry take all the guards, the non-adventure guards he had specifically for situations like this, and had them fall on the man like it was the day of Uther, and Kermial had showed up to teach that king a lesson. He looked at the mess on the table and set about putting the papers back in order. At least them, I wouldn't have cared if they died. Tib stared, realization setting in. This was Marger. This was the man behind all the problem his town had. And by how dismissive he was about Harry's guard dying, it didn't sound like he had much more care for the people of Kragorog than Tyrannia herself had. He breathed to keep from acting rashly. He forced himself to consider the man. The green of his eyes meant wood, which surprised Tibbs until he sensed the reserve. It was denser than any he'd sensed before. Alistair told him there were no alpha adventurers, but without that information, Tibbs would have thought the man was at that level. That, combined with the fact that with the right knowledge, any element could do a version of what other elements did, meant Tibbs needed something that acted fast, and he would have to pour all the essence he had. All the will he could into that. Because for the man to have grown powerful enough to lead the guild, he had to have a lot of willpower. How full was his reserve? Somewhere near half, but his was vast, so that would be more than Marger's, right? Wood was susceptible to fire, so he could channel that, unleash it, and the man's clothing was enchanted. That wasn't surprising. Everyone within the guild wore some things with a some wore something with a weave. Like Tirania, most of what the man wore was enchanted, and like her, Tibbs had no idea what any of it did. It could easily be something that would counteract fire. Corruption, then. It ate through even the densest weave. If Tibbs put everything he had in it, the man would be a puddle before anyone could react. Tirania, too, as well as the guards. Maybe Dawn. He'd been amazed at how much will the sorcerer had, but without warning? Would he be able... This becomes a question. Would he be able to do anything as the corruption spread? How about the clerks and the runners in the building? Once unleashed, how likely was it Tibbs would be able to control all of it? He'd been focused on making sure he'd be focused on making sure Marjorie died, so whatever escaped would be free to do as it willed. He breathed. This was still him. This was still acting rashly. It was still lashing out without much thought, and others paid for it when he did that. He never wanted to be that petty child again. He would take down the entire building and everyone working for the guild if he had to. They had all played their part in letting Craggle Rock suffer. If he had to do that, he'd see to it none of the innocents were here. But he didn't have to do that. He could bring this building down, the entire guild, simply by killing this man. All he needed to do was plan, be careful, and not get caught. If no one knew he had been the one doing it, there would be no reprisal directed against him or his town. After all, a man as powerful as the leader of the guild had to have enemies with their own reasons to want him dead. Well, Marjorie demanded, the tone and glare directed at them, making Tibbs realize he'd missed a question. The guild leader, Dawn said smoothly, laid out her instruction for what we were to do clearly. The man snorted, but Dawn continued unperturbed. And we were able to handle both incursion while she could ensure the dungeon was protected. Marjorie studied the sorcerer. You're the kid who brought down the criminal's house. You're the reason we were able to get our hands on those stones. Yes, sir. Gotta say that's impressive, the man said in a pensive tone, which shifted to harsh as he looked at Tirania. From the reports I received, the enchantments on the house were significant. They were, sir. But corruption is particularly well suited to eroding essence weaves. It's why Tibbs came up with the plan. The sorcerers who put them in place were sloppy, and once the weaves started collapsing, the corruption I had sent against it, spread to the building, and nothing could stop it from coming down. Marjorie shifted his green eyes to Tibbs. You're a rogue, right? Yes. Remembering who he was speaking to, he added, sir. Yeah, one of you would come up with something like that. He grabbed a page and looked at Tirania. But that doesn't excuse what was wasted because you had kids dealing with the situation. Then there's that pool of corruption those sorcerers are building over. How is it they bought it from some random merchant? With everything that was going on, Tirania replied, her tone confident again. Dealing with the fallout from the attack on the dungeon, it wasn't at the top of the priority. Then how is it you let that merchant keep the abyss thing when you were done dealing with those priorities? He yelled. Places like that are too valuable to let slip through your fingers. Oh, of course. How could Tirania let someone other than the guild get all the coins from selling the pool? Tibbs was glad everyone's attention was on Marjorie and Tirania because he couldn't stop the eye roll. And unlike him, they would have kept the coin for themselves instead of using them to help the town and the Omega runners. Tibbs had surprisingly few of those coins left. He'd expected to be able to fix all the problems with how many he'd had, but doing things discreetly came with added cost, and those had made his coin vanish as if they'd been dropped in the pool of corruption. Then there's the lake, the man said with a sigh. There's nothing I could have... She stopped at his glare. Have you at least investigated how it is this city has 4 such places ready for an audience? Don glared at Tibbs, who shrugged. If they were referring to the places where the connections to the elements were closer, Tibbs hadn't known there were four of them. There was the pool, the lake, the area behind the archery field. Those were the only places he had an audience, so that alley where he'd been stabbed, that first time he'd been stabbed in an alley with a metal sword, he had had an audience there. And he'd had an audience because of that. But there had also been the audience with light, so shouldn't Marjorie have said five? Only that one had been on the roofs, so maybe they weren't looking. Maybe they weren't looking there. Maybe, however, they went about detecting places like that needed them to be close. Tip certainly couldn't sense them at a distance. How would I know? She demanded, annoyed, and Tibbs realized he'd missed more of the conversation. If I may, Don asked, and the guild leader raised an eyebrow. I'm to be a scholar, not an adventurer, so I've done a lot of reading about everything that has to do with the elements. The man motioned for him to continue. While I haven't read everything there is, I've yet to come across any research that supports theory claiming the creation of thin places can be influenced by us, people. The evidence we have shows they are usually linked to places where the element is present in abundance, but beyond that, the whim of those elements seem to be what governs where they appear, no matter how much we might wish it was ours. And in all this reading, you somehow remember doing, the man said with some derision, has there been anything about so many of them in one location? No, sir. But again, there are far more books I haven't read than those I have. Marjorie chuckled. You're going to lose this one the instant he passes his test for Epsilon. Mark my word. The universities will fight to get a mind like his, which is too bad. He locked eyes with hers, because we could use smart people managing guild houses. He raised a finger to silence them without looking away. Don't defend her. Don closed his mouth. You have cost us people, Tyrannia. Runners that should have died in the dungeon, runners that should have died in the dungeon, died in the streets. I don't think there's ever been someone before you that has cost us so much with your habit of putting children in charge of things people with the right training should have handled. People you had under your command tier. The guild has had a bad manager before, but I can't think of one who matched your level of incompetence. You even lost us one of our best guardsmen. Or are you going to claim Harry Wells is off on some mission I haven't been told about? Her shake of the head was small, and Tibbs thought it was more out of fear than her telling him no. This man really had all the power. What about you? The guild leader asked Tibbs. Do you know where he's vanished to? The reports I was sent say you two had some sort of arrangement. No, sir. I found out he was gone the day I was first taken to his office, and Irdian was there instead of Harry. Irdian? The man laughed. Oh, you using his name like that must piss him off to no end, considering the length he went to shut you down. Don't worry. I don't care about this racket of yours. So long as you make sure it keeps not interfering with guild business. Tib only has the best interest of the guild in mind, Don said, while Tibbs focused on breathing. The man smiled. Irdian doesn't think that, but then again, he disliked rogues more than Harry ever did. Comes with the job, I guess. Focused on the papers, plural. Restacking them. Unless you have more tricks for them to perform, hoping to impress me, Tyr, you can dismiss them. The glare she gave her leader was hateful. The dismissive wave sharp, and the guards escorted Tibbs and Don out of the room, then out of the building. Tibbs didn't sense the them as they walked out. He sensed as far as he could but that secret was not there. It didn't matter. Even if they had heard what he and Don talked about, it had nothing to do with Stowe. That was interesting, Don said. I don't think Tyrannus is going to be in charge for long. Tibbs nodded. It wasn't like whoever replaced her would do better by his town. Marger's comment made it clear he did care nothing for Tibbs's town and the people who lived here, other than how they advanced his goal. How long until that happens? How long until Marger left and Tibbs lost his chance to fix things? That will depend on how much evidence is needed to go through before a decision can be rendered. He's clearly made up his mind, but replacing someone assigned to manage a guild house can't be done just on one man's opinion. So days, weeks? Is he going to stay here while doing that? In the night, while he slept, getting through whatever enchantment protected his house would take work, but was doable. And under that protection, he wouldn't wear many of his woven items. I doubt it, Don thought. I don't see a man like him staying in a place like this. It isn't like he'll have to wait in line to step on the platform. He'll sleep in his home and come back each morning. No killing him in his sleep. And the only place Tibbs knew where to find Marger would be within the guild building. With enough time, he could learn the places he liked going when he wasn't working and have a better place to remove him. Probably a back alley. There had to be a reason so many attempts on Tibbs's life had taken place among them. Unfortunately, without knowing how long Marger would be in Craggle Rock, he couldn't risk it. It would have to be inside the guild building, probably within that same room. The method had to be precise. Tib only wanted that man to die, so he needed to come up with a way to concentrate all the essences he'd need into one focused attack. A killer's knife, Tibbs thought, smiling, with an edge of corruption to cut through the weave protecting Marger and something else. For once, it was inside to help in case the man could do something about it with his element. He'd also need a way to get in unnoticed, and then, "What are you thinking about?" Don asked, tone casual. And he couldn't go to Don for assistance. His friends couldn't even know what Tibbs was planning. He was the only person in Craggle Rock with corruption as his element, so they were going to question him. Tibbs didn't think anything less than light was going to be used during that, so Don wouldn't be able to lie. None of his friends could know for the same reason. Tibbs didn't plan on getting caught, and he even had thoughts on how he might be able to defeat light when it was used on him. But he was okay with his involvement being discovered so long as none of his friends were caught in that, except one. As much as he didn't want to involve him, he needed Kumdar's help in using darkness to combat light the way the door had done. He'd have to be careful not to reveal anything, but the cleric would respect his secrets. And if it came down to it, Kumdar had no attachment to Craggle Rock, and the guild didn't own him. He could easily vanish and never return. "Tibbs?" Don asked with insistence. "Sorry, just thinking." "And about what?" Don's tone turned suspicious. "Nothing important." And that concludes chapter 100. If you are if you are enjoying this, please leave a like. If you want to know when the next chapter is going to be up, subscribe and hit the bell. If you want to read this story, it is up on Royal Road for free. If you want to read ahead of Royal Road and support me in the process, that is on my Patreon, where we are about 20 chapters ahead. If you want to listen to these live, it's every Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Time on Twitch. The links are in the notes, and with that, I shall wish you a good day.